Okay.
So good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you again this evening. We had some excitement this afternoon, but I'm glad that everything worked out. Everybody's safe, and I think I share the sentiment with I believe it was City of Ashland, Chair Post, thanking all of the first responders that got there quickly and responded well. Glad for that. Are there any urgent updates or announcements? I know that there's been, I don't think it was announced, excuse me, I know there has been a lot, but not a lot also about Daryl, that of course he's got, looks like a mass in his frontal lobe, and but not a whole lot of information about what they are going to or might be able to do even about that. Just be praying for Elena and especially. We saw Rebecca posted that Jewel and Seth are in the area where there was that school shooting in Georgia today. Not that them or any of their kids were in danger, but it's very close to them. So be praying for that, just in general.
And Rebecca also shared Dottie Anderson's message that Gary got some kind of treatment today.
Jackson.
Yeah, that's right. And they're very tired, but they're grateful for all the love and support and prayers that they've got.
It's like, oh, is Daryl still here in Ashland, or did he get?
As far as they were thinking about moving and not even Metro, but all the way to Portland because of what was going on, but I don't recall specifically if she said on a text.
That's what I was wondering. I heard them possibly move, but I didn't hear whether what really happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Ashland is equipped for something that severe, but I don't even know that Rogue Valley is really equipped for that either. Like most of that stuff is just given away, just you. We'll start to begin with a word of prayer and then ask Thomas to go lead us in the song before we get started with our class. Let's pray. Our Lord and Father, we thank you for this time together to study from your word, and we thank you for providing safety on the fire today, and we thank you for all of the first responders and those that helped out with that, and keeping not only our properties and things safe, but others as well. Thank you for that. I ask that you'll be with all of those who are being affected by fires that are still going, various firefighters and groups that are doing those things. Of course, we're mindful of many who are on our prayer list. For Daryl and Gary, David Shepard, and the other Davids as well, for Bubba, Pat, Betty, and so many others, Father, who are always on our hearts and minds. We thank you, Lord, for this act of prayer that we can put our concerns and troubles before you and know that you hear them and you do care for us and that you answer these prayers as well. Please, Lord, be with us tonight as we study from your word. Help us in our understanding that we can be better servants in Christ's name.
Hymn number 603. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. 603.
Days are filled with sorrow and care, on earth's are lonely and drear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Calvary, Calvary. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Cast your care on Jesus today. Leave your worry and fear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Calvary, Calvary. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Troubled soul, the Savior can see every heartache and tear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Calvary, Calvary. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Is that on the little one for the
So, yeah.
This is on. Oh. If I need to put this on.
This is.
Okay. All right, so we're going to continue our look at the book of Psalms and some of the different types of Psalms as we, as I mentioned, there are a few different ones. We've looked at a few, including praise Psalms and acrostic Psalms. Kind of getting back more to, I guess, the theme aspect as opposed to the structure aspect. Talk about what are called penitential psalms, or psalms of forgiveness. There's not always in these psalms an explicit mention of specific sin. There may not even be a direct asking of forgiveness or confession, but it's kind of implied by the subject. Probably one of the psalms that most comes to mind when we think of these is Psalm 51, written by David, and we have the superscription to Psalm 51 that it was written following Nathan coming to him in regards to his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah and others. And again, a very beautiful psalm. He does, of course, here talk about being washed as iniquity, but nowhere in the Psalm specifically, for example, does David mention adultery or murder. But it's, given especially the superscription, we know what he's referring to. Connected to this psalm, though, and I wasn't aware of this before doing some of these studies, is Psalm 32. Psalm 32 is also written by David, and many commentators believe that this is essentially the answer to Psalm 51. So Psalm 51 is the psalm asking for forgiveness, essentially, and Psalm 32 is praise and thanksgiving for forgiveness, if that makes sense. And so if you don't have, a bookmark, and not all of them do, not all of, in fact, a lot of cross-references don't link these two as far as the pre-printed ones in our Bibles. But I would recommend writing a note there. Psalm 51 and Psalm 32 do appear to be very connected in this regard. So a couple other examples would be Psalms 38, 130, 102, and 143. If you just want to jot those down, and if anybody wants notes after or whatever, just ask me and I have notes. But we'll look at Psalm 38 just kind of as an example. Again, this is from David. He begins here, rebuke me not in your wrath, chasten me not in your burning angers, for your arrows have sunk deep in me, and your hand has pressed down on me. There is no soundness in my flesh because of your indignation. There is no health in my bones because of my sin. Here David is going to continue. He's going to give a very vivid picture of what he feels holding on to his sin is doing to him. Beyond here, no health in his bones, and soundness in his flesh, but he's going to just continue and talk about the burden and feeling like a festering wound and all of these things. And again, it's very poetic, very beautiful, and songs like these for me kind of help me put in context, because we've all been there, and yet at the same time, we all begin at times to develop calluses to certain things, right? And that's the danger of sin. We're told in the New Testament that continuing to sin build calluses on our heart to where we don't even realize that sin is sinful. Every sin leaves a scar, so to speak. As one brother put it, every time we sin, it leaves us a little bit less innocent. And the danger is, of course, if we don't feel this way about our sin, we're in danger. Because it's the sin that we no longer feel the need to seek forgiveness for. It's the sin that we no longer feel that being this crushing weight, this festering that could be our downfall. So I think there's definitely benefit, even if we're not in a situation maybe where we feel encumbered by sin. I think it's a good. There's always room to look at passages like this as a reminder of how dangerous sin can be. David speaks here even of losing his sight, of losing relationships, losing touch with those around him, because he's so bothered by this. And as Paul puts it in the New Testament, we need to be reminded of the exceeding sinfulness of sin. At least for me, in a very poetic way, these remind me, I should say, of what this is, but also as he closes this, in verses 21 and 22, do not forsake me, O Lord, O my God, do not be far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. We're also reminded of where to seek that help. And this is something that's beneficial as well as we talk with people, especially who are not Christians, because a lot of groups don't necessarily tell you to go to God for your sin. Tell you to go to other people. But we don't seek forgiveness and absolution from people. Now, if we've directly wronged them, yes, that can be part of the process, but the one that we need to be most concerned about is God himself. But there are a lot of people in this world that are not taught that.
So, I'm going to use the Catholic Church as an example. I know that the Pope is considered the vicar of God on earth or something. But when people would go and ask for forgiveness or penitence or whatever, they would go to their priest. And it had to be a priest. It couldn't be some other lay brother or something like that. Is that because the priests were considered representatives of God on earth, or what's the deal?
Yeah, so so to repeat, or at least summarize the question, in regards to the Catholic Church specifically and them seeking forgiveness, they ought to go to a priest. The Pope is, of course, seen as God's representative on earth, so how is are the priests as well? And the short answer is yes. Catholic priests have to be ordained, have to go through, specifically they have to go through a Catholic seminary, and they have to receive a commission from the Catholic Church itself. There's a whole lot of things, but there are parts of that, vows, including vows of poverty and vows of celibacy, that are a part of that, but yes, they are considered representatives of God, and then essentially then from bishops, cardinals, etc., up all the way up to the Pope, it are levels to seek help from if there's a situation that is maybe outside of their purview, or essentially for a priest, he has to go to a bishop has to go to etc., etc.
But I think what I've seen and heard is that when they do go to a priest, they're telling the priest what their sin is. And the priest then tells them what they need to do. Is that giving them forgiveness, or when they do their rosary prayers or whatever, is that when they're supposed to give forgiveness? Or do we know?
Now, of course, the problem, sorry for repeating the question. Yeah, remember to do that. The question is when they confess to the priest and he tells them what to do, is that their forgiveness, or is it after they've done their things? And I would say, first of all, we have to be careful anytime we try to categorize an entire whatever, because you can't say, for example, all Baptists believe X, Y, and Z, because, well, even amongst the Baptists, there are division. That's why there's First, Second, 12th Baptist churches, etc. Southern Baptist, others. They wouldn't have those divisions if they all believed exactly the same thing. And the same thing goes for Catholics and their dioceses, even though technically there's supposed to be unification, there's not. And I have family members who are Catholic, and they will tell me, and they told me this is best. Just like we would think there are liberal Catholic churches and there's conservative Catholic churches and everything in between, as we might think of it.
To kind of answer Steve, because I was brought up Catholic.
Yeah.
Saturday he would go to confession, and he would delegate us to what your penance was, And that's where the rosary came in, because there's beads on there, those beads represented a prayer. You started at the bottom, at the cross, sign of the cross, then there's a bead, then three, a bead, if I remember right, then there's like a medallion in the middle, and then it goes off. And then when you sign the cross, Lord's Prayer, Hail Mary, full of grace, and then when you get to the center of the medallion, then it's the act of contrition. Is what that prayer was. That was something we had to learn when we were in catechism. And then you branched off, and it makes no difference if you went left or right. And then there would be a bead, that would be another Lord's Prayer, and then there'd be 10, a bead, 10, and I don't know how many there was all the way around. And so each one of those beads represented the Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary, full of grace prayer. And then you might say, you need to say 3 rosaries, 4 rosaries, or whatever it was. So you'd have to go, after you went to confession, then you'd walk over to a pew and then kneel and sign the cross. You sit there, that's why you see these people, kneeling down, they got the rosary in front of them, they're just keeping track of where they're at.
So it's a 2-stage process.
What's that?
They've got to go to the priest
First.
and then whatever they need to do.
Right, and he delegates what it is, and how he comes up with what he does, I haven't got a clue. And then then you can get communion on Sunday.
But you can't go directly to God.
No, you went to the prayer, you went to the
You
priest.
go to the priest.
They also generally don't recommend reading the Bible. They recommend reading your, what's it called?
The catechism.
The catechism. Because my grandfather converted to the Catholic Church about the time that I came to the church. And he was always very proud of telling me he read his catechism every day, and I asked him about reading his Bible, and he says, we can't get a machine. Because again, that's their, at least in some, that's part of the division between the clergy and laity, is the clergy are the ones who understand things, and they tell everybody else. So, and again, I'm not saying that that's how all Catholics are, all Catholic parishes or churches or dioceses or whatever, but because like I said, there are across the board different things, because there again, my step-grandmother would complain, she is a lifelong Catholic. But, she would complain that, oh, this priest over here is doing all this crazy stuff, or, they're advocating for this, that, or the other, or, this group is saying that, you can be gay, or whatever. And again, overall, Catholic Church has their set ways, but that doesn't mean that somebody's not out there doing something.
And you find that in the church.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, anytime I mention something that's tied to any kind of denomination or whatever, I always like to have that little caveat that this doesn't mean that that's what everybody who calls themselves X, Y, or Z, they don't all fit in one little bubble. Again, we can look at public figures, whether it be politicians or celebrities or whatever, and a lot of them, claim to have ties to various religious groups, but then you look at it, and you look at maybe some of the things they advocate for, and it's like, that doesn't match, right? Well, for one thing, the Catholic Church is probably one of the most outspoken groups when it comes to abortion, and yet how many celebrities and politicians claim to be Catholic and yet support, those things. Doesn't match. So,
And the nuns are more liberal than the priests.
yeah. Bill asked, why is Psalm 51 not assembled before Psalm 32? And answer to that, I do not know. Again, how the Psalms came to be in the order they're in, we're not really sure. But that's like I said, that connection between Psalm 51 and Psalm 32, that just seems to be the a very accepted one from a number of different scholars. So, and when reading the text, I don't disagree with them or see any reason to disagree with them, I guess. But kind of going back to the idea of these and how dangerous sin can be. I have a quote here from Brother Johnny Ramsey. You probably don't know that name, but he was one of the founding teachers at the school of preaching that I went to, a very powerful preacher from Texas. And he said he was quoted by my instructor. He said the worst thing about sin is that heaven knows it. Again, going back in Psalm 51, David talks about that. Where can I hide from God? The answer is, of course, no. And so again, I think sometimes, visiting these, even, especially if we are maybe struggling with something, it's a good time to visit some of these Psalms. But even when we're not, these Psalms are a good source of just that reminder of, how dangerous sin can be. So, we do sin, but as Christians, it should be something that we want rid of as soon as possible, right? I mean, that's why we were baptized in the first place. That's why we sought Jesus in the first place. So, and again, there are others that probably would fit into this, and there's also a section of Psalms called Lament Psalms. These I'm choosing to differentiate because these are much more personal in nature, where Lament Psalms are generally kind of national in nature. They might still be talking about sin, but it's usually a much broader scope as far as forgive me, Father. Well, I think of Isaiah. He stands before God and he says it. And he says, I'm not a man of unclean lips, and I come from a people of unclean lips. It's different for Isaiah to have his own sin, but also recognizing that the nation is unworthy to stand before God as well. And so we'll talk about lament psalms as well, but they, again, like most things in the Bible, there's crossover and some intertwining of those things, but these particular ones, when we talk, I'm mentioning this idea of penitent psalms. These are more personal about the individual's relationship with God.
So, can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
Sorry. In the Old Covenant, could Jewish people, go directly to God? Or did they have to work through priests there?
They had to work. They did go directly to God by going through the priest. It was a little bit different. See, that's part of it. Is Catholicism, for example, and Catholicism isn't the only one that does this because, well, pretty much any church that would be we might call Reformed. So that would include Lutherans, Presbyterians, and others. They are essentially the Catholic Church, but not actually part of the Catholic Church. As far as they still keep the division of laity, clergy. They ascribe to most Catholic doctrine. It's just, for example, with Lutheranism, there's those 99 things that they disagree with specifically, right? So I just want to be clear that Catholicism is not the only one that does this, but Catholicism and those types of groups blend in the idea of the priesthood from the Old Testament as the priest is the one that takes it to God, but people didn't, that's not how the priesthood works in the Old Testament. So to answer your question, did people go directly to God or to the priest? It was both. They weren't confessing their sin to the priest because the priest had to take it to God. They were confessing because the priest had to be the one that took the sacrifice from them to the altar, and they had to confess as they put their hand on the head of the animal, and the priest cut its throat to spill its blood for their forgiveness. And then on the Day of Atonement, the priests were responsible for, again, presenting the people's sin. And again, I am personally of the idea that they probably were not being intimately specific as in, and Joseph from the tribe of Benjamin committed adultery this year. I don't think it was that. I think it was more, we have committed adultery. We have committed murder. The priest would know. And again, there wouldn't be one priest every time somebody came because they would take rotations and things. But in doing that, they were coming directly to God because that was how God had specifically prescribed in the law, in the Levitical law. If you have sinned, this is how you would obtain forgiveness. And it was by taking that animal to the priest so the priest could then put it on the altar forward. But as far as the forgiveness, that was directly between the individual and God. The quote act of penance that we might see today wasn't a prayer, it was, here is the animal that cost me money, I now have to watch die because I committed this against God. And that's the one, that is the one area, I do not want to be a butcher, okay, but that is the one area that I think helped ancient Jewish people be very much aware of the danger of sin. Because every time you sin, you have to watch an animal die. It's going to burn something into your brain.
Sacrifice 1,000 a day. Plus.
And it had to be the best of the lot.
And yeah, and that's the thing too, is it did have to cost. And I mentioned this in the Leviticus, God gave levels, right? So you could have, if you were rich or you were a priest or the king, you had to offer the bull or the calf. But then if you were middle class, so to speak, it was a sheep or a goat, and then or it was 2 turtles or 2 pigeons, essentially. But they still cost you something. If you did, even if you were raising, even if you were a shepherd, you had to take the best 1-year-old sheep or goat that you had, and that was the one that you were going to have to give because of your mistake. Or if you weren't a shepherd, if you were a merchant, I think of, for example, Paul, being a canvas worker, probably didn't have a stable behind his, so somebody like that's going to have to go to a shepherd and, hey, I need your best animal. And yes, that shepherd's going to get compensated for that, but it's still going to cost both of them, right?
So when I was in, I can only touch around the edge of those when I was in Utah one time and visiting with Kyle and Megan. They have Mormon friends, and Megan says that when you go to the elders to confess, he says, kind of like, okay, I committed murder. That's what you want. She said they would want details. Say you wrote some bad checks. When did you get the idea to start writing them? For how much? Where did you write? They wanted to know details, such as saying, hey, I wrote some fraudulent checks. I stole from somebody. I murdered. They wanted. That's what Megan. She says they have, several friends that are Mormons, and she says they seem to want to know detail for whatever reason. I don't know what the deal is.
Okay, so I have friends that are Mormons, and I have friends that are Mormons. Okay, and I've done extensive research into the Mormon Church because there was a time when I thought we were going to be moving to Utah. So the question for those online, the question was, some friends of Megan and Kyle's that are Mormons said that when they go to confess their sins, they often are asked questions. They want details. When did this start, et cetera, et cetera. There's 2 levels to that. One, the Mormon Church is very insular. They take care of their own. If it's something that they can handle in-house and make go away, they will, including paying people's bad debts.
Like they insulate.
The church itself will write a check to cover the bad checks and make the scale go away. Because they want their image exemplary. I also know this because I do business. And guess what happens? Essentially, of the Mormon person gets to a point where we might have to send them in collections. We suddenly get a check from Salt Lake City. Now, that's not for everybody, and that's not as though a Mormon person could go out and bracket $10,000 in credit card debt and just be like, you know, they have to be in good standing, and there's, you know, again, a thing for this. So that's number one, is that a lot of times what they're trying to do is evaluate damage control. And see if it's something they can just handle on themselves. And then the other is they're also going to come up with kind of their own definition of what's going to have to be done. And so some of that is just Mormonism is very integrated. That is, in talking to people who are Mormons and people who, in fact, there's a preacher in Sacramento that we're friends with, that he is a former Mormon, and he's written books and he does seminars about leaving the Mormon Church, and also the sorted doctrine that they have. But yeah, so first is damage control, and then secondly, it's they're going to come up with their own odd whatever of their version of penitence, whatever it might be.
Oh, like the consequence.
I understand.
Their own version of what it's going to take for you to be forgiven. And we need to be careful, because groups like the Mormons or Christian Scientists, they're really kind of their own thing. Like, can't really group them in with everybody else, because they really fly their own flag and do their own thing in those regards. So, again, the Mormon Church, I think, is a little easier because it's so big that they don't have as many secrets as they used to. But yeah. So yeah, that's part of why they ask those questions.
Damage control.
Yeah, probably more than any other group, they are very image conscious. And I don't say that, and again, they're not the only ones, because again, the whole scandal revolving around children, for example, and the abuse of children that has come on in recent years amongst some of these groups. The reason it got so big is they were doing the same thing. They were trying to enslave themselves and enslave their people, trying to handle it in-house. Which, by the way, not the right thing to do. God tells us we have to obey the laws of man, and we also have to face our consequences. You know, as an example, for someone to steal from the church treasury, and the church should turn them in. I firmly believe that the church should turn them in. Yes, forgiveness is between God and them and things, but there's also consequences to our actions. And moreover than that, they no longer get to touch the money.
So, yeah, here's a thought. We're told that if we're able to solve the problem, then isn't there a brother among you that's wise enough to settle this conflict?
And if it's a personal conflict, then yes. If it's a criminal act, that's something entirely different. If it's, for example, James speaks of that, and that's mainly when there's troubles between brethren, you know, and there he's talking more about civil matters, like taking each other to, like, swing one another. Those are civil damages, and that kind of stuff I think can be taken care of in-house. That's not criminal. Because here's the other thing: is I've heard of congregations, for example, where somebody, let's say, acts inappropriately with a child, and they decide they're going to forgive that person. They come forward, and I've even heard of congregations that allow that person to remain a part of that congregation while their victims are still there and the families are still there. That's wrong. You're subjecting those people to that kind of abuse and that kind of memory every Sunday. And here's the thing: is that people who are willing to cross that line rarely cross that line. they need to get help. And I'm not saying that the prison system is always the best place to get that, but again, the family can also go to the judge and say, look, we have forgiven this person, but they need help. That doesn't mean they're gonna do 20 years hard time to the worst of the worst. But the church needs to be transparent, needs people to see that, look, we do care, and one of the ways that you care is by, providing protection for people who are wrong. And whether we're talking about the children or whether we're talking about the treasury, somebody steals from the treasury, they've harmed every single person in the congregation. And for a congregation to then go, no, this is fine, or the eldership or whomever to go, no, it's fine. Really?
On the Jewish system, they had to pay back like 5 times the amount.
And again, it's just one of those things that, there needs to be, things need to be handled properly. If it's something that is, again, of a civil nature, if it's just a disagreement between two brethren, yeah, that kind of stuff does need to stay in-house. And I would say the same thing goes for matters of sin that are not criminal. So, for example, if you believe somebody is being a faulty teacher in regards to something, but it hasn't, obviously crossed the line into criminality, we don't need to take full-page ads out in newspapers. That's not a public. That's not a public thing. That's a church thing. But criminal things are different, at least in my estimation. In my understanding of Scripture, based on what Paul and others say about needing to obey the authorities, whether that's paying taxes or being generally law-abiding citizens.
Got to be careful that we don't mistake forgiveness for it's a wiping away of sin. It is not a wiping away of consequences to that sin. And especially when we deal in matters of abuse, we need to make sure that we aren't giving the idea to people that have been abused by somebody that if they are truly forgiving, they would go back into that abusive situation. That goes for children, that goes for wives. Does not mean you have to subject yourself to abuse. We have a friend that was harmed as a child, and her family, who are now members of the church, were heavily pressuring her to forgive that person. And what they meant by forgive was if that person was at a family gathering, she still had to go. If you forgive that person, you have to come to this dinner. And they were not allowing her to say, because so-and-so is there, I will not be attending. And that's not okay.
Yeah, we certainly don't ever want to be in a position where we as the body in general are telling potential victims that we're willing to look the other way in regards to the consequences of action. And there are consequences to the action that were done against that individual or individuals that they're going to have to deal with it for the rest of their lives. How is it fair for the individual who committed those acts to not also have to suffer consequences potentially for the rest of their lives? Consequence is not the same as forgiveness. And we have to understand. In the same way that temptation is not the same as sin, consequence is not the same as forgiveness. We can be forgiven and still face consequences.
But you see that sometimes on TV, especially in a courtroom, when somebody will stand up, well, I forgive them. Well, like you say, it doesn't really have anything to do with what's going on in the courtroom, which is the punishment of your actions. But yet it seems like people equate that sometimes.
They do, and like I said, on TV and things, people have often made that equivalency, and it's not there. Because here's the thing, my understanding of the law is if there was ample evidence that somebody robbed a bank, even if the bank came forward and said, we forgive them, the judge doesn't have the right to just go, oh, have a good day.
Yes, okay.
Because the other thing is, and I found this out by being involved in a situation, there's often the whole thing, oh, he's not stressing charges. It actually doesn't matter. If there's evidence that a crime has been committed, the police can arrest you and you can be prosecuted even if the other person says, I don't care, keep my name out of it. If there's evidence that you have committed a crime, they don't have to have, if you beat somebody up, even if that person says, I don't want to go to court, if there were enough people saying, oh yeah, I watched that guy beat that other guy, you're probably going to jail. Regardless of whether the person who was hurt presses charges or not. And again, that's also, I think, part of the problem is we have these TV things and everybody thinks that that's how the real world works, and it's not.
It's how a lot of sin has come into the world.
Sorry.
It's how a lot of sin has come into the world by watching TV.
Listen to something about much thinking. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, again, you know, and I've mentioned this before, you know, the example of, you know, unplanned pregnancy. They can be forgiven, but that doesn't mean that the baby goes away. The same thing goes if somebody commits a crime. They can be forgiven, that doesn't mean the consequences go away. David's a great example. David was forgiven, but he absolutely had to face consequences, didn't he? And so again, we need to follow biblical example. All right. I don't think I really want to jump to an entirely different type of song. So, I don't know. Okay, well, I guess we'll have to try to find, I don't know, my notes are organized, so I don't have any of my notes right here on the national song. So I guess we will start a topic, and that's going to be Thanksgiving songs. Now, this is another one of those ones that we're going to see crossover. For example, praise psalms often mention giving Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving psalms are often going to mention something along with praise. The difference would be the overall subject matter, where the one is mostly about praise and worship. These are mostly about just giving thanks for God. And they come in a couple of different styles. There's individual Thanksgiving and communal Thanksgiving, and then there's kind of a blend. These are a little bit harder to classify specifically because they're not actually Hebrew word for things. There is a phrase around the idea, but often what is, for example, translated as Thanksgiving in our Bibles from the Hebrew isn't a single word, not like it is in English. And it's more about the phrasing of it. And it often has to do with the phrase, another phrase of blessed be the Father. So that phrase in itself might be there, even if the term thanks or thanksgiving, as we would render it in English, doesn't appear. Again, because there's not, and this happens with a lot of languages, right? There's not always an exact English word for something. There's not always an exact, at least the way that we as English people would expect to express something. There's not always an exact direct way to do it in another language. And so, yeah, this is kind of one of those things. And probably the biggest way to differentiate between a hymn of praise and a hymn of thanks is hymn of praise is often describing his nature and his awesomeness, his majesty, where these are going to deal more with specific character attributes, his long suffering, his forgiveness, those types of things. Now, there's obviously also a measure of praise to these, because you can't really worship without being thankful. And if we're thankful to God, express it, that in itself is also an act of worship. So there can be some blending, but like I said, we're going to watch out for some of those phrases. Obviously, as it's translated in English, we're going to see thanks or thanksgiving, but also that phrase, blessed be the Father, blessed be God the Father, or something to that nature where, in essence, offering a blessing to God as opposed to from God. Because that's what thanks is, to an extent. All right, so let's talk about a couple of these psalms, or at least one of them with the time that we've got left to kind of give ourselves an understanding here. So let's look at Psalm 21. And if I could have somebody read verses 1 through 6 to begin.
The king rejoices in your strength, Lord. How great is your joy in the victories you give. When you have granted him his heart's desire, and have not withheld the request of his lips. You came to greet him with rich blessings, and placed a crown of pure gold on his head. He asked you for life, and you gave it to him. Length of days, forever and ever. Through the victories you gave, his glory is great. You have bestowed on him splendor and majesty. Surely you have granted him unending blessings, and made him glad with the joy of your presence.
Thank you. And can somebody read Psalm 20, verses 1 through 3, please?
May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of God of Jacob set you securely on high. May he send you help from the sanctuary and support you from Zion. May he remember all your meal offerings and find your burnt offerings acceptable.
Notice the connection. Many people believe Psalm 21 is an answer to the request made. As in, Psalm 21 is the prayer of thanksgiving following the answering of the prayer offered in Psalm. But again, we are glad that he is his strength and salvation, so we rejoice. That's both praise and thanksgiving. But he's talking here, you have given to us what we need, you have not withheld, you've given us blessings. He asked for life and you gave it, you've lengthened his days. Again, even though the term thanks, we didn't, nowhere here does the psalmist say thank you, God, in the way that we might express it in English. By looking at the context, we understand what he's doing. He's praising God for giving these various blessings and these various answers to prayer. Verse 6, you make him most blessed, you make him joyful with gladness in your presence. And so, And then verse 7 is kind of a summarization, where the king trusts in the Lord, and through the loving kindness of the Most High, he will not be shaken. Of course, this is also written by David, so when he says the king, he's speaking of himself, but not obviously completely, he's talking of any good king of Israel or otherwise, but he's saying essentially not that the king's faith is based upon the blessings, but the blessings shore up his faith. If that makes sense. David was not looking at God as though he was some sort of spiritual ATM, but the blessings of God helped David to know that his faith was well placed. And I know it sounds like mental gymnastics, but changing our way of viewing the blessings of God in that way makes a big difference. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at verses 8 through 13 if somebody doesn't mind reading those for us, please.
21.
Yes, fine.
Your hand will find out all your enemies. Your right hand will find out those who hate you. Will make them as a fiery oven in the time of your anger. The Lord will swallow them up with his wrath. Fire will devour them. Their offspring thou will destroy from the earth, and their descendants from among the sons of men. Though they intimidate people against thee and divide the flock, they will not succeed. For thou wilt make them turn their back. Thou wilt aim with thy bowstrings at their faces. Be thou exalted, O Lord, in thy strength. We will sing and praise thy power.
Thank you. So verses 8 through 12 represent an assurance of the victory, and not just momentary, right? He talks about generational protection. Because again, God's blessings are not just momentary. And then verse 13 represents something that we see also in the New Testament, and there's a Greek word for this. It's called a doxology. It's taken from the Greek word doxa, which means praise. And a doxology is an outpouring of praise. Paul especially is prone to doxology. For example, in Ephesians, there are two where, as he's talking about the relationship with Christ and his church, he'll just say, and praise be to him forever and ever, to him who holds all things together in his might. That's what it is. It's an outpouring of praise as the writer of either poetry or, in Paul's case, the letter. And thinking about the majesty and what God has done for them cannot help but burst out into a verse of praise. So that's what verse 13 is. As David here thinks about how God has protected him and taken away these enemies, and that God himself is offering protection, he offers this final word of praise. In essence, because he cannot help himself. So, again, I love those little things. One of the things I like about Paul's writing is I think sometimes in the New Testament, especially, Paul gets that rap as far as he is very technical in his writing. Don't get me wrong, and he loves lists and things of that nature. But Paul is also very poetic in his. These I call it the doxologies, especially.
Do you think maybe that came because you heavily studied the Psalms?
Probably.
There was a song we always sang growing up in the Methodist church, so we just called it doxology. And I remember the song, the words, but it was a phrase. It was always after the offering.
Okay. And I know congregations of the Lord's Church that have not necessarily done that type of thing, but for example, I know congregations that will have a song in between, for example, the Lord's Supper and the and speaking about the contribution. And often that song is one of similar praise or thanks for blessing. That picture as a way of kind of that mindset. So, and again, just because they're doing something in a denomination doesn't mean it's wrong. Or
I was
bad.
thinking back in my mind of the words, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. I think we can sing those words and
I think we
praise God and all blessings flow.
do sing this song.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm like, I know that name as a song name, yeah.
Again, and that's also another thing to notice that most of the songs in our songbook are written by people from denominations because, well, there just aren't that many songwriters amongst the Lord's body, or at least nobody's taking the time to amass that many of them. I do know of at least two that I actually know personally, but that's exciting. So give me a couple other Psalms of Thanksgiving if you're taking notes. And then we'll close. Psalm 30, 34, 40, and 66. And we already mentioned Psalm 32 in regards to the penitent Psalms. But like I said, Psalm 32 is kind of a thank you for forgiveness. And so it would also fit here well as for a Thanksgiving Psalm. And again, if anybody wants these lists of Psalms, because I know that I kind of quickly, just let me know. I'll share those in a more personal and easy, or even in written form. So, all right. Well, that's it for tonight for the class. I do see that there's a note here. Daryl is at OHSU, and Elena is there with him. So, they're still kind of waiting to do the biopsy. It sounds like next week. So she said it sounds like next week. So, obviously, in our prayers and things. But if there's anyone, if there's anything else before we close. Would you mind leading us in a closing prayer? Would you mind?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on your building, joining your prayers with dismissed. Our gracious and heavenly Father, again, as we leave this place, just pray that you keep us safe until the next appointed time. Thankful that we're able to assemble here freely and study your holy word. This time we humbly come before you and ask to be with all those around the prayer list, especially Mark's mom and dad, Lane's son, we have the Anderson family, Tennessee, Maggie Anderson also lost her husband, Bubba, just so many others, and two people that we have at the top of the list when whether they're on Zoom or here in the building, are always uplifting to me. Pat, Betty, pray that you keep them safe also. Pray that you keep this nation safe. Pray that you be the first responders. And we're so thankful for all the many blessings, especially the blessings we have waiting for us in heaven. We do your will. Please keep us safe until we assemble again. Pray this again.